All right, just heard the lady say recording in progress. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's Joe and Jason. It is Preakness Eve. It is Friday, and we hope you're doing pretty well. What's going on, Joe? Is this the first time you've ever been on a podcast, now that I think about it?
I did like a brief one when I first started at West Point, but this is the first time I have the honor of being on with you.
I'm saying, though, not only with West Point in your entire life. I don't think
Oh
you
yeah,
had ever
no,
done a podcast.
no. I've heard vaguely of these things, but no, I haven't participated much.
Well, I think you'll do a good job. I got all the confidence and faith in the world in you. And look, as far as the stable goes, as far as West Point goes, it's been a pretty good start to Preak this week. We had that good second out of Rojo, runaway Rojo on Wednesday at Horseshoe Indy. Horse got a 78 buyer, by the way, for running second. Looks like he'll stretch. King's Ovation had the big win. For 62.5, essentially doubling up in claiming price Thursday at Churchill. And then we just saw, Joe, about an hour ago, we had another, very solid, honest effort, but also in a lot of respects, very frustrating race and trip for Battle of Normandy in the Friday opener down in Maryland.
Yeah, I mean the pace came back pretty quick in terms of the late pace. I think they came home in 35 or so. So he was a little bit up against it with that Mike Maker horse getting the jump on him, but finished up really well. Didn't switch leads until late, which maybe suggests he wasn't in love with the turf course, but just another solid effort for him. And it's interesting what you said about Runaway Rojo getting the 78 buyer. That should play really well in some of those Indiana bred stakes. And congrats to the partners on King's Ovation, because he's really strung a couple of nice races together now. And, like you said, winning for 30 and then winning for 62.5, you don't see that all too often back to back.
No, definitely not. And I think Dale's horses as a whole have run very well, and that includes a win a week prior with Giant Game. So good to see Dale firing on all cylinders. Naturally, we'll hope for an Indiana bred stakes in the near future of Rojo, and for finally a clean trip with Battle of Normandy, wherever his next start is. I would imagine it'll be up at Belmont, but we'll leave that up to Shug, who coincidentally, Shug does have a long shot in a very short 7-horse Preakness cast. I mean, Joe, I think a lot of us woke up Friday morning here, because it is Friday afternoon after all, depending upon, and I didn't stay up late. I wanted to for the Florida Panthers game, but a 2 a.m. end time for game one in the Eastern Conference Finals, little past my bedtime. But, aside from that, waking up, big scratch of first mission. This, to be fair, and we love racing, but, we'll call it as it is. It's a very light Preakness on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, it was even before the scratch of first mission, and now it's even more so. A lot of intrigue came out of the race when he scratched, I believe, because I think, maybe with the exception of Mage, he's got the biggest upside out of anybody that was entered. And I figured he was going to be a handful in here, getting a really good trip. And it affects the pace of the race too. He was expected to inject a little pace from the outside post there. So it's a shame to see him scratch, but we do get the Derby winner, which, not a guarantee these days that the Derby winner even shows up to the Preakness after what we saw last year. But he is here, and it will all be intrigued, especially the New Yorkers amongst us, or the transplanted New Yorkers in your case. We always love to see the Triple Crown on the line at Belmont. So I think that's where our hearts are going to lie on Saturday.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, even having AP, having American Pharaoh, and then Justify, haven't had those two recently for Bob Baffert. I would love, it doesn't get old. Absolutely. Would love to be at Belmont. And I know you'll be there, and I'm planning on being there Belmont Day for sure. Would love to have another Triple Crown on the line, without a doubt, for just very likable connections with Mage. Now, as light as this field is, Joe, you and I had discussed this race before recording a podcast this morning. You and I have chatted a little bit about the Preakness and what we're both thinking. And again, without First Mission, who I was going to pick on top, you're looking at an odds-on favorite. And short field, kind of a race that's light on pace. But I think the good news, if you're in the camp of Mage and if you're Javier Castellano, you're probably pretty confident you've got a horse who, in theory, shouldn't be compromised by a slow pace, right? I mean, looking at his first two races over the winter at Gulfstream.
Yeah, I mean, he was tipped out first time out and blazed through 22-3 and 45-4, 110 flat. I think it's really just circumstance the last two races that have had him so far back. In the Florida Derby, obviously he missed the break and he had some early traffic in the Kentucky Derby. And I think it just speaks to his talent and how versatile he is that he was able to overcome it in both scenarios. You know, the Florida Derby, you could argue he was best. He definitely was best in the Kentucky Derby, but this is the kind of race where you don't want him to be 50 lengths out of it. You want him to be up close and to be able to use that speed. And Javier's a smart guy when it comes to that. He's very adept at judging the pace and doing his homework, you know, a great handicapper as a jockey. So I think if you're him, you know, you let the 4 go to your outside, you probably let the 1 go to your inside, and then you probably want to be laying 3rd or 4th in this race, only a couple of lengths off of the pace. And I think that'll give him his best chance. And he certainly finished in the Derby up great. So you don't think, you know, even, you know, with a mile and a 16th cutback, you think it might be even more up his alley. But yeah, you want to be in touch in this race, especially with the scratch of First Mission.
No, well said for sure. And he's by a horse in Good Magic who's got 3 in the race. You know, I started and kind of segued off our intro and talking about Battle. Jug's horse, performed by Good Magic. Chad's horse, the Champagne winner over the Slop last year, Sloppy Track at Aqueduct and Blazing Sevens. And naturally, you've got your Derby winner here. And it wasn't long, Joe. I had a couple of thoughts. Well, I guess more than a couple. When they hit the wire a couple of weeks ago on the first Saturday in May, it got me thinking the connections here with Mage, very likable people. And it wasn't long after it was made public that I committed to, you know, leaving first in the Stronach group at Gulfstream and committed to taking the gig here at West Point. I got a call from Gustavo Delgado Sr. in, you know, sort of his broken English, wishing me good luck with the West Point job and that he would miss seeing me on the air at Gulfstream and how much he, you know, respected my chops on the air, which was really great. So, you know, it's nice to see some new shooters there. The other thought was, Joe, I was like, you know what? I'm glad West Point has that Good Magic cult. Stars, 6 stars and strings, stars and 6 strings, whatever his name is, going to Brad Cox. And it sounds like he's leaving just about any day now from Ocala to go to Brad's barn at Churchill Downs. Let's talk about Bob Baffert, though, in the meantime, Joe. We'll jump over to National Treasure, who, again, with no First Mission, he's going to be a clear second choice. Where do you stand with this horse who's now synced and locked back in together with Baffert from that inside post?
Yeah, you know, I initially was a little bit against him just because I preferred First Mission. I thought they were going to be in a similar price range, but, you know, now he's very clearly the other horse in the race. You know, you think he's probably a cut below Mage. Mage ran a 105 buyer in the Derby. He got a 0 on the Thoroughgraphs. And if he runs back to that number, he's going to be very, very tough to beat. You're hoping with National Treasure that he takes a little bit of a step forward, second off the layoff. He ran okay in the Santa Anita Derby. I thought he kind of found his footing a little bit late in that race, galloped out with the winner. It was not a particularly strong Santa Anita Derby field, I don't think, but he was coming off a 3-month layoff. He's back in the Baffert barn now. It'll be interesting to see how Johnny Velasquez rides him in this race because, like I said, you think the 4 is going to go. He looks like cheap speed, but National Treasure is supposed to be able to get out of there and get running and be sitting fairly close, if not on the engine in this race. You know, if you liked him, I think you're probably pretty pissed off at the scratch, the First Mission, because, you know, you probably were going to get 4-1, 7-2. You know, now he's going to be a pretty close second choice, I think, probably in the 2-1 to 5-2 range. So there's not really much value on him, but he's supposed to work out a great trip. And if Mage bounces a little bit off of that Derby race, he's the horse to beat.
It's just wild. And I think that, you know, your take, very well said and very much grounded sort of in reality. But I was thinking, because my initial reaction to the Santa Anita Derby, who, even though Practical moved, the race came up pretty fast. I mean, he had gotten, at least on buyer, he got 100 buyer for the race. My take was I didn't love the race as a whole, with him, Mandarin Hero, and Skinner kind of clumped up, and the way National Treasure looked like he was going to be well beaten off the turn and then re-engaged and was kind of right there in a blanket finish. But just crazy, like such an unprecedented Kentucky Derby with all those scratches the day before and the day of the race. Like, there's been no gauge because it's just wild to me that Practical Move and Skinner both scratched out of the Derby. We'll see what National Treasure does. Your third choice is going to be Chad's horse, Chad Brown, who's got 2 Preakness wins on his first ballot Hall of Fame resume. I mean, he'll obviously be inducted his first year of eligibility. Scary to think what Chad's resume will look like when that year comes. He's got Blazing Sevens, the Champagne winner. What do you think of this horse who, outside of, like, if you say, all right, Gulfstream can be a funky track, especially going that first finish line, sometimes quirky 1:16 distance there on the main at Gulfstream, all of his races relative to a pretty lackluster Preakness field. I mean, he's been kind of right there. So let me ask you, Joe, I mean, where do you stand with him? Is he a dangerous horse?
I think he is. I would like him a little bit better if he had a little bit more early speed, because he did show a little bit of early gas in that debut race, but since then he's dropped pretty far back out of it. I mean, you can see in the PPs, he was last early in the Hopeful. He was last early in the Champagne, even though he won the race. He eighth in the first calls. I just don't think that that's going to play well in this race, where I could see, National Treasure and Mage just being second and third and then 1-2 down the stretch and just battling the whole way. I thought that, he had a little bit of an excuse because he had a wide trip in the Bluegrass, but I thought my feeling on the Bluegrass was, other than the top 2 horses, that was a pretty lackluster renewal of that race. And if you look at the past, if you look at the horses that were behind him, he narrowly got third in there. I didn't think that was a very strong field. I don't think that any of those also rans are going to be winning grade 1s later in the year. I could be wrong, obviously. I would like him more if he were more forwardly placed, but he's pretty clearly the third most likely winner. He goes third off the layoff, and he does have the grade 1 win on his resume. He's by good magic, as you said. He was an up and coming sire. Now, I think he's going to have a little bit too much to do turning for home.
Fair enough. How about the prices? I mean, you've got Mage, who's kind of off by himself, and then Baffert's horse, who's in a different category, and maybe there's a relatively big significant gap back to Blazing Sevens. Everybody else going to be double digits. I mean, does the Asmussen horse, Shug's horse, any of them float your boat to maybe clunk up and get a piece of this thing? And by get a piece, maybe even run second?
Yeah, no, to me, it's the only somewhat bright idea I have in this race, or funky idea I have, is Perform. You should go back and watch the replay of the Tessio if you haven't seen it. It's honestly one of the most improbable wins you'll ever see in a dirt race, because he stumbled at the start. He was way out of it. He got stuck in traffic several times throughout the stretch. He had to angle out, then he angled back in, then he angled back out. He jumped back to his left lead, and somehow he still ran down 90% Maddie in the shadow of the wire. Obviously, it was a pretty quick pace, so it was coming apart a bit late, but it was like watching a turf race, and you see these turf horses dive through these holes and somehow get up because they're able to gather momentum multiple times. That's really hard to do on dirt, and I think that he did that several times throughout the stretch. I mean, you wouldn't have taken 50-1 on this horse at the 16th pole in the race, and he still somehow got up and won. I mean, he's got to get faster on paper, but similar to Mage, if you go back in his PPs, he's got a lot more speed than you would think, just looking at his last 2 races and where he was early. He's shown 22:45 and change speed when he was a sprinter. I thought his Tampa race was better than it looked as well. The runner-up came back to win. There were a couple of other horses that improved their figures coming out of that race. I think he'll probably be in that mid-pack range. I want him probably just off of Mage's flank if I'm no jockey. And, he's got to get faster on paper, but I think that showed a lot of guts the way he won the Tessio Stakes. And if there's anybody that's going to be a part of the trifecta, the exact at a price, I think it's him. Probably won't be as big of a price as he is on the morning line because of the scratch of First Mission. Will probably be more in the 10 to 12-1 range, but he's the kind of somewhat clever idea I had, just because I think he's getting better at the right time. And I was just so impressed visually with the way he won the Tessio.
Now, what about it? I mean, we've got another Shug horse, pretty important start, actually, keeping it real with Wayhill Road. It's an important race for him earlier in the day, which we'll get to in a sec. This Triple Crown obviously has not been a great one. I get the story of Mage, and just looking at him isolated, that's good. Everything else that has gone on has not been good as a whole. And taking that a step forward, I think the conversation has certainly, the volume of it has increased. Looking at what happened to Churchill with the scratches and everything like that, you've only got one horse out of the Derby winner Mage returning in the Preakness. Where do you stand, Joe? I mean, you're a New Yorker like I am, native New Yorker, great respect for the tradition and history of the game. Where do you stand about, again, because it's going to reach a zenith, I think, about potentially changing the Triple Crown at this point and maybe spacing the races out, having a longer amount of time between races as opposed to the 5-week series as it's been forever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a traditionalist with this kind of thing. I think the Triple Crown series is supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be a real challenge for a horse, the likes of which they're not going to see at any other time in their racing career. But, this is just the way of the world and the way things are going in racing. And, I can only be the old man shaking my hand and saying, get off my lawn for so long because, like you said, we only got the Derby winner this year from the Derby to run in the Preakness. We didn't even get the Derby winner last year because I think that was the real seismic shift in terms of, now it's not even guaranteed that the Derby winner is going to show up.
So crazy. It's so crazy.
Which was wild, but I would love to see it stay the same way forever, but this is just, it's the way things are moving, and we're just going to keep getting weaker and weaker Preakness fields until something is done about it. I wish that trainers would just toughen up and have the guts to run their horses. And then you have a break after the Belmont to get them ready for the summer and the fall campaigns. It's just not how they operate anymore. And yeah, I think it's inevitable that we're going to see wider spacing, and I think you're going to get better fields. But I think that some of the historical significance of winning the Triple Crown is going to go away when that happens. And I think it's just making it an easier thing to accomplish takes away some of the specialness of actually being the one to accomplish that feat. And there's a reason there's only been 13 Triple Crown winners.
Yeah, well said. I pretty much agree on all respects there, Joe. And I can be a real, obnoxious purist with a lot of things. Certainly when it comes to thoroughbred racing, which, like you, I love more than anything and will to my last breath. But got to tell you, I mean, looking at the last couple of years, I was dead set against it. And I will say, in a rather short amount of time, I have warmed up to the notion of potentially at least having the discussion to change things, just because, I mean, the Preakness, it's just a snooze fest. We hope it's a great race, and good luck to Mage. It'd be awesome to have a Triple Crown on the line, but it's just crazy thinking back. I taped something, Joe, and put it up on Chatter yesterday, and had mentioned the two Preaknesses I've been to in person in my life were 1997 and 1998 while I was in college. And I didn't go back and look through the charts, but you had like Freehouse, Silver Charm, Captain Bodget. I mean, they were right there in the Derby with each other. Same thing with Real Quiet and Victory Gallop. You ran in the Derby, you ran well in the Derby, or maybe you didn't run well and had an excuse. You came back 2 weeks later, and you know what? You came back 3 weeks later after that mile and a half or not in the Belmont, and that just not the way it is anymore.
Yeah, I think I think it used to be a point of pride for trainers and owners of horses who maybe ran second or third in the Derby and thought, I think we're actually better than that horse. We'll get him in 2 weeks, or if we don't get him then, we'll get him in 3 weeks after that. But now it's the path of least resistance is favored by most trainers in racing now, unfortunately. And yeah, resistance on our part is futile, I think, when it comes to keeping the Triple Crown as it is.
No, for sure. You are correct, my friend. Now, Shug McGahee has got a Derby win with Orb, won the Belmont with Easy Goer. We'll see if Shug can make some noise looking for his first Preakness win. We hope, though, the Shugster will have made a lot of noise at around, we'll call it like 11, quarter to 12, 10 to 12 Eastern on Preakness Day, because he's got our horse, who we own in partnership with Woodford and Stone Street, the number 4 Wayhill Road, making, I think, a very much anticipated turf debut. I will add, this horse has met some very good company, including a very fast race at Gulfstream last out, where he didn't, and I don't want to be too hard on anybody, he got a terrible ride in the race. It was just a bad ride from the moment they sprung the latch. Wasn't going to beat Dreamlike or Empire Strikes Fast, but the trip and tactics didn't help. Off that race, they let him try the turf one morning at Payson, and being a quality road, I remember Anthony Hamilton, Shug's assistant, said he really ripped over it nicely and got over it nicely. So hopefully this will be the coming out party. What are you thinking, Joe, of our horse, Way Hill Road, and maybe some of the competition there in Saturday's third?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on his race last time out. It was just a no shot trip that he got. The race two back, I think, was the best race of his career. You know, he pressed a really fast pace and he just got a little bit tired late. You see Jason underlying Kingsbarns there, who obviously came back to win the Louisiana Derby. I think if he runs that race, he's going to be very tough if he takes to the grass. I think he's got enough turf pedigree. It's not like a bull you over turf grass leaning pedigree, but it's a funny thing if you look to his inside with the 3 Langley Avenue, also by Quality Road, out of a Malibu Moon dam. So I was looking at like the Tomlinson figures and I was like, how are these exactly synced up? And then I looked, and of course they have the very similar pedigree, 3/4, I guess. That's a horse I don't really know what to do with. Debuted at 4 to 5, showed some speed, backed up, comes back quickly as a new gelding here. I of the two, you got to go with Way Hill Road just because he's actually shown enough talent on dirt to suggest that if he switches to turf, he's going to be among the top 2 or 3 finishers in here. But it's a wide open race, Jason. I don't know who you lean to. There's a couple of horses with a little bit of turf form. To his outside, Way Hill Road, you got Too Far East as West, who was a good second to our Basanio, debuting at Laurel, made up a lot of ground for Mike Trombetta. So you got to think he's got some talent. Mike Maker horse on the rail, who's been progressing kind of nicely and got a decent trip last time out for the first time and ran okay. On the outside, we've got the 10 horse who, makes a lot of sense as well. He's got swagger for Ken McPeak. He's been close a couple of times. And even the firsters, Jay, I'm curious what you think about number 9 Headline News and then even number 13 Pittigore. They both have nice turf pedigrees and seem to have been working really well.
Yeah, work tab on both those horses. They've been electric. I mean, and I clearly circled going back to JJ Toner's horse. Now that Palm Meadows turf course, and he's got those 2 breezes 8 days apart. That is a very firm turf course, pretty much like Gulfstream. So, I mean, it's a glib surface, so you're going to see some fast times, but still, those are exceptionally good-looking breezes on paper. Big fan of Jimmy Toner. May not have, and he was never a guy that was going to train 100 horses at a time. When he had all those old school Darby Dan horses that were later for the Phillips family, but his operation has absolutely contracted a bit. But guy's not only a friend of mine and a good guy, but he's an excellent horseman and so good on the turf. So no question. I mean, it's taken the 9 Headline News, being a 4-year-old, a little bit of time to make the races, and you don't know if this was a horse earlier in his career that was slated to start off with Shug or Chad or some of the other guys that Joe Allen uses, and maybe this is where he fits now. But he's an interesting new face, and the Wertheimer and Freer horse. I mean, how do you like those works, Joe, coming out of Turfway for Jeff Engler? I mean, just cranking out 47s like clockwork.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see that often. 59 and change too, going 5 furlongs on the synthetic track over there. Jeff Engler is a sneaky guy. He wins some races at Gulfstream, not a big name, but he also can pop up at Keeneland and win some races. I think it's interesting that Jose Ortiz is tasked with the ride out of a Danzig dam, which I always like to see. One of the great broodmare sires of all time. He doesn't have that many in the PPs these days. So I like to see that. He's got a nice classic distance pedigree. Obviously the 13 hole, maybe there'll be some scratches, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And Headline News is, out of a Warfront dam who's also out of a Rahi mare. So that dam side is all grass for Headline News. And this is a scramble. This is a wide open race. I think this is the kind of field you want to go deep in if you're playing multi-race bets. But I think Way Hill's got as good a shot as any if he can transfer that dirt form to the grass.
Definitely. And the Maker horse on the rail seemed to step up his game at Gulfstream Park last time. So good luck to the crew there. Way Hill Road, obviously, for Shug and Tyler in the third. Be quiet, Z. Now let's move on. Yeah, I hope her barking isn't too loud or obnoxious. I will take you down the block to the park in about 10 minutes. We've got one more race to cover. And good luck. I mean, from Joe and I and everybody, we've got Western Command running Saturday at Churchill, our lone Kentucky starter on Preakness Day. And then Empire Ride goes Sunday. I'm glad they finally used his race. He'll go Sunday in Jersey. A lot of shippers. I looked at the race, didn't have a really strong grasp. I do think, though, aside from just the competition and it being a good spot, he's also going to like going 2 turns on the dirt at Monmouth. But of the Sunday horses, and I mean, really outside of Saturday's action, Joe, the real other interesting race from just a handicapping perspective with a West Point horse in it comes up in Sunday's third at Belmont Park, where we have the returning Royal Velvet. He's the 8 horse. He's the younger 3/4 brother to our own Voodoo Zip. Was a high level draft pick leaving Ocala last year. I know Eddie Woods was really bullish on this horse, as were a lot of people. And he was a big favorite first out. 3/4, 6 furlongs, wound up being a little too sharp. He ran into a buzzsaw in Oxymore. Second start, he kind of got lost early and was very hard held and rank in that race and just kind of flattened out. We've given him the time. Excited to see Royal Velvet back. And, what do you make of him, Joe, and the field as a whole there as he makes his 3-year-old debut?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good spot to get him back. I think, especially going 7 furlongs off the layoff. I think that makes all the sense in the world. And then you can kind of, gauge whether or not he wants to go shorter or wants to go longer based on how he finishes up in this race. George Weaver's got a couple of horses. He's got 2 that both look pretty imposing. They both have similar styles, both front runners in Cumberland. And then I think the Dark Vector is the name of the other one on the outside. Yep. Neil Drysdale's got a horse that was close and has been close a couple of times, ran pretty well at Keeneland last time out. I thought on the rail, the Tom Morley firster was pretty interesting, being by Not This Time out of a Scat Daddy Dam. Bred for turf on both sides, seems to have been working pretty well on the Belmont dirt for a friend of West Point and Tom Morley. First time out, drawing the rail at kind of a middle distance. Don't really love that, but there's a lot of ways to go in here. Similarly to the Wayhill Road race, like you were saying, it looks like a bit of a scramble, and I think this is a good spot to get Royal Velvet back and just kind of gauge where he is, because it's not the toughest maiden race you're going to see at Belmont, but it's not a field full of slouches either. And I like that he stepped forward in his second start, even though he ran 6th. He improved 16 buyer points. That's not easy to do when you're going from 6 furlongs in July, then 3.5 months off, going a mile and a 16th at Belmont and Aqueduct in mid-October. So he's going to need to move forward similarly in this race, but I think it's a great place to get him back and just kind of see where he is on a talent standpoint. Because like you said, I know there were expectations for him as a 2-year-old, but it's been a while. Kind of got to reset here and just see where he's at.
Absolutely. For Christophe Clement, our good buddy, the Clement operation, happy to say, and more importantly, see some pictures of some of the new 2-year-olds that have made their way up to Saratoga and are with Christophe and Miguel up there yesterday in the Thursday updates. Yeah, man, Slapshot, the Nyquist colt, who we jumped in on last September as a yearling and promised to appear, the Matoli filly. Both of them have already arrived in Saratoga. So there's a lot to look forward to. And, talking about Shug, some of the 2-year-olds that we've got with him, including Cagino, who's up there already in Maryland, and Sedona, first captain's full sister. So again, didn't get the trip we wanted to start Preakness weekend in Friday's first with Battle of Normandy, but it's all good as we come up on also, I should say, Joe, I think in all likelihood, the last 2-year-old sale West Point's going to attend this year, with the Timonium sale this coming Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, and Mage is a well-known graduate of the basic Mid-Atlantic sale, and it's a fruitful sale, but I think it's also a good sale because some horses can fall through the cracks because so many people were buying at OBS March and April. There's fewer horses, and I think a lot of people kind of exhausted their bankroll or their interest through the first 2 sales, and the horses breeze over dirt, which I think is a big deal. And I think it's more projectable for what these horses are going to be doing going forward. You know, chances are at the OBS March and April sale, they're on synthetic. Chances are those horses are not going to be synthetic superstars going forward. They're probably going to end up on dirt or turf. This time you get them to see them over the main track at Timonium. You get to see how they move over the dirt. So I think that that's really valuable. And I think it's been an underrated sale for a handful of years now. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we come away with. And yeah, like you said, this will probably wind down most of our 2-year-old buying for the year. So it's going to, I think we're going to come out of this sale with some quality runners.
Definitely. And want to thank everybody. I mean, all our partners, and especially, and there's many of you new faces, new partners that had been looking, and the time was right. It was the right horse, and jumped up and purchased a horse in either the March or the OBS April sale. We've got 14 new prospects we're thrilled to have in the West Point family. There's no West Point without you guys. So we thank the partners. Joe, this was really great hopping on with you and talking about the Preakness and a few other races as well. I hope you have a great Preakness day and Preakness weekend. And we'll have to start doing these on a pretty regular basis for sure, especially now that primetime Belmont season, the Belmont Stakes, that's really going to come into full view after Saturday's action in Maryland. And before you know it, my friend, we'll be upstate New York. You can take the New Yorker out of Florida. You can't take the New York at you, right? I still call, despite living in Fort Lauderdale, Saratoga will always be upstate. And before you know it, we'll be upstate at the old spot.
Yeah, no, and this is great. And I think you can relate to this, having done Talking Horses and doing the Gulfstream broadcast all those years. It's great to talk about these races, get your thoughts out loud, and have some kind of back and forth about it, because you can pick up on things that you wouldn't have normally picked up on when you're just in your own head handicapping by yourself. So this is great, and I look forward to doing more with you.
Yeah, definitely. Plus, we love talking about West Point horses and our own horses. One of my favorite subjects on the planet. All right. So for Joe and I, have a great Preakness, everybody. Good luck to Mage, and we'll see you next time here on WPT in 30.